Okay, just like that. It's noon on the dot here, Wednesday, May 15th, 2024. Thank you all for joining the final installment of our 2024 Spring Energy Speaker Series. My name is Donovan. I'm the Outreach Director here at Renewable Energy Alaska Project. I'll be handing it off to my colleague Jenny to run the show here today. But before I do, first off, wanted to acknowledge the lands that we're on here today. I'm zooming in from Dena'ina lands in Anchorage, and here at REAP, we really draw a lot of inspiration from the Alaska Native peoples, their cultures, their history of stewardship of these lands, and their innovative practices for sort of conserving their resources and thinking, over a long-term horizon about the future that they seek to build and ways of working in collaboration to make that happen. And so, really bring that inspiration to our work here at REAP, and would encourage you all to do the same. I'm trying to toggle the chat here, but I'll include a link in the chat where folks can sort of look up the native lands that they're calling in from, and we encourage everybody to interact with in the chat, sort of sharing your name, affiliation, and where you're zooming in from. But as I mentioned, this is a REAP Energy Speaker Series webinar, and so just also wanted to remind folks who we are. We're a member organization with a statewide presence representing over 60 electric utilities, developers, and other private businesses, NGOs, educational institutions, local governments, and individuals, all really with the mission of accelerating the development of renewable energy and promoting energy efficiency across the state of Alaska. So just really appreciative to all of our partner organizations and supporters that make this work possible. You see a number of them here on the panel as well. So really excited to highlight their expertise and the true innovations that they're spearheading here in the state of Alaska. So I'll just list off who all we have here today. We have Brian Hirsch from DeerStone Consulting, Edward Dellamary from Tanana Chiefs Conference, Ingemar Mathiasson from the Northwest Arctic Borough, and then of course my colleague Jenny Stars, who is our network coordinator for the Alaska Network of Energy Education and Employment. Really excited to jump into a conversation about the rural independent power producer model, who and what it takes to really sort of spearhead that model and all the benefits that might flow from it. So with that, I will just encourage folks again to sort of introduce yourself in the chat here as you're able. I will be monitoring Q&A, so please, as you have questions, log those there. We'll make sure to answer them at the end. But without further ado, I'll hand it off to Jenny to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Donovan. Like Donovan mentioned, my name is Jenny. I work for REAP for our program ANNIE, the Alaska Network for Energy Education and Employment, alongside ANNIE Director Chris McConnell and our People in Power Training Coordinator Jacob Powell. Our team works to build up clean energy career pathways and connect folks in the energy industry to education, training, employment, all really to increase communities' capacity and ability to accelerate the energy transition. And through that work, we were really talking to a lot of different communities and individuals interested in or pursuing independent power producer models for bringing renewable energy into rural communities, but a whole host of other goals alongside that, lowering energy costs, increasing energy security, things like that. So we wanted to bring together some experts with really a wide range of expertise in setting up and managing independent power producers in rural communities to demystify the process a little bit and shed some light on really who and what it takes to get an IPP, an independent power producer, up and running. And before we get into our discussion with our panel, I just wanted to, I know there's a lot of acronyms involved in this discussion, so I just wanted to make sure I go through a couple of those to make sure we're all at the same starting point. Like Donovan mentioned, please throw any clarifying thoughts or comments in the chat and any questions in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get to those at the end. So I've already mentioned independent power producers, or IPPs. These are separate entities that own, operate, and maintain energy generation facilities, sometimes energy storage infrastructure as well. And these can exist as, for-profit businesses, like on the Rail Belt and in the lower 48, the entities that built the solar farms in Houston and Willow. And then they can also exist as nonprofit entities, which is what we're seeing a lot in rural Alaska, owned and operated by tribes or a nonprofit organization, or sometimes involving both entities. But in either of those, ways of ownership. The IPP still is funding, building, and maintaining that infrastructure, and then selling power to the electric utility that services the area, which is responsible for the transmission and distribution of that power to customers. And the way that agreement is ironed out is through a power purchase agreement, or PPA, another acronym, essentially a contract that negotiates the price the utility will pay, the IPP per kilowatt hour over a set term. And through the PPA, the power purchase agreement, like I said, there's a price set, and then the IPP, is receiving that money as a revenue. It can pay for things like its operations and maintenance. If it's a for-profit IPP, pay investors. And if it's a nonprofit, can be used for a community benefit. And so, crucially, in rural Alaska, establishing that power purchase agreement with an IPP preserves the power cost equalization payout, or PCE, that independent utilities throughout rural Alaska receive from the state to equalize the electricity rates that are paid by their ratepayers with the rates paid by Railbelt residents. And there's a lot of nuance into that discussion and the formula with PCE. But I'm kind of gonna kick it over to our panel now to start our discussion to discuss more of the IPP setups and details. These, like I think, the definitions are helpful for setting the stage, but every community, every situation is different. I just wanted to kind of define some terms as we get started. So to introduce our panelists, we have Brian Hirsch, founder and president of DeerStone Consulting. Brian, can you flesh out your background and role in the IPP landscape in rural Alaska?
Sure. So I've been working with rural Alaska tribal communities for close to 30 years. And oftentimes what we've seen forever is that either the individual community is running its own utility, and they're often struggling with all sorts of requirements, from filing reports for power cost equalization reimbursement to just keeping the diesel generators up and running. And or there's an alternative situation where there's maybe more of an aggregated utility, such as, say, Alaska Village Electric Cooperative, that runs 58 or 59 systems around the state of Alaska. And frankly, because they're larger and that's really their expertise, they often have an easier time of keeping their system going. And so with an independent power producer, what we kind of came across was a situation where if the community itself was going to create a new project, say a solar and battery project or a wind project or what have you, they often needed A, technical assistance to really get the project up and running, and B, they needed a market to sell their power, and the market is the electric utility. So in a case such as, say, AVEC, a lot of times they may be wary of depending on another outside entity to provide power for them when they are ultimately the final accountability entity for providing that power when it's cold and dark and the lights are and heat's necessary, things like that. They're really the ones responsible. So what we needed to do was develop both the technical capacity and the financial wherewithal for small communities to be a reliable partner for AVEC. And so partnering with entities like, say, the Northwest Arctic Borough or Tanana Chiefs Conference, both of whom DeerStone Consulting does partner with, I think we kind of became a big enough and a reliable enough entity for AVEC as an example. And I'm just using them as an example. I'm not trying to single them out, although they've been really a great partner and really have been an important element in unlocking this whole equation. So I think with the larger entities backstopping individual communities and us providing the funding primarily through outside grants to the, in this case, tribes typically, to get funding, develop solar battery projects, be able to sign a contract with AVEC that says we guarantee we're going to provide power to you, and AVEC says we trust you, and this is we're going to incorporate this as a reliable component of our power delivery system. That's from the technical and institutional side where we've helped to play a role, is to kind of bring the money in and provide some of that technical expertise and the negotiation roles with the different entities. And so then everybody has a unique role to play, and I'll kind of turn it over to the others to share some of their roles as well.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, now love to hear from Ingemar Mathiasson, the energy manager for the Northwest Arctic Borough. If you could introduce yourself, give some more background, and describe your role in the IPP landscape in the Northwest Arctic Borough.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm Ingemar Mathiasson with the Northwest Arctic Borough since 2008. We've been running the renewable energy process here for 16 years now. And it's very interesting to see that we finally settled in on trying to look at what an IPP model looked like in 2020, 2021, and the Shungnak project came into effect. I was looking back at the grant that we got in 2008, 2009, that actually was stating that the wind turbines we put into Buckland and Deering between 2008 and 2012 can be operated as an IPP under certain circumstances with an avoided cost rate in operations. If I had paid more attention to it back then, a lot of changes would have happened already back in 2008 to 2010. It's been a long kind of struggle finding a way of not losing the PCE for the utilities. That's happening. But in the long run, with the Energy Steering Committee running for 16 years, the communications we've had between all the entities, in particular AVEC, to come to an understanding of doing all this together. And also the IPP model that we've been working with binds the community together better. The community, city, tribe, and utility function better with a handshake of the community then having the power to produce their own future and be part of it in that discussion. So that's my journey for the last 16 years.
Thank you. Really excited to dig into more of that. And we also have Eddie Dellamary, the Rural Energy Specialist at Tanana Chiefs Conference, as well as an Arctic Energy Ambassador here with us. Eddie, can you give us a brief introduction to yourself and your work as well?
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I'm Eddie Dellamary, the Rural Energy. I go by manager now, so I'm no longer specialist, Rural Energy Manager.
Okay, Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, just the title as things are. But I work here for Tanana Chiefs Conference. Been here for nearly 2 years. I started out initially as a contractor for Hughes Village Council, and that was one of the initial projects here in the interior for larger community scale solar and battery projects, which really came with a lot of the momentum that had been going off in the Northwest Arctic Borough, being led by Ingemar and Brian and a whole collaborative team over there. But here in the interior, Hughes was very pivotal moment, and I joined towards the end of that. Had already been installed. It was finalizing commissioning, and I really got into the weeds on how to make a successful solar battery project work. And I worked on several manners doing that. And finally, we wrapped things up, and I helped the city manager / second chief and the first chief at the time create and write the power purchase agreement, that contract modeled off the one that Ingemar and Brian had been devising and actually executed for several communities up north. So that was the first IPP I helped set up, and then since then I've been working with Sega over in Galena for their solar projects, and since then we've been awarded for 12 other solar battery projects throughout the region here in the interior. And so similarly, we are going to be working on, you know, an independent power producer that'll most likely be a regional IPP. And so I can discuss that in length later, but that's kind of all things IPP and energy you know, for me. But so it hasn't been 30 years but, you know, I haven't actually been alive for 30 years yet. So maybe one day I'll be able to say I've been doing that for 30 years. So yeah, that's my background. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would say, you know, experience comes in more than just years. This is actually my 1-year anniversary at REAP. So celebrating it with this webinar. Obviously, thank you all for coming to my anniversary party. But I also wanted to share that we have a real wealth of experience on PCE reporting and utility management in our attendee list. I'm going to see if this works. Jacob, our People Empowered Training Coordinator, mentioned in the chat, but gonna try to see if their video will work quickly to show their room. They are hosting a training on PCE and QuickBooks and other you know, crucial utility management training tools over at Kuselvat Career Academy with some really talented instructors. I think I see Connie Fredenberg over there, Terry Harper from INN Electric, and Catherine Aubry from AEA. So got a lot of expertise there as well. And hopefully we will be able to get you guys into the conversation as we talk more about, you know, some of those important utility IPP collaborations for reporting and bookkeeping. So thank you guys for being here as well. And to kind of kick us off, you guys all touched on, you know, the process of setting up an IPP and all the different partners that you negotiate with, get on board in order to get this up and running. So I was curious for Brian, how have you and DeerStone Consulting worked alongside local communities to navigate that early process, especially through, you know, that back and forth between all the different entities and establishing a positive working relationship?
Sure. So, I mean, it has been very iterative, and I think there's been a lot of pieces to it. Nana Regional Corporation, who's not on this presentation, but looms very large in the Northwest Arctic region in particular, has been a huge supporter of this work. And things like Zoom, for example, are great tools, and it allows us to connect across long distances and save money and time around travel. But in the end, going to rural Alaska, the relationships that are built and the kind of necessary trust and just deep understanding of systems, technology-wise, as well as social systems, really, in the end, there's no substitute for being there. And for example, right now, we have staff that are up in the region working on troubleshooting in the community of Noatak with AVEC, with our staff, with people in the community that are getting trained, that are meeting, you know, we're meeting with the tribe, we're meeting with the city, or actually there's no city in Noatak, but we're meeting with the tribe, we're bringing everybody together. And so it's been a long process. And, you know, going up there once, people are like, who is this person? What do they want? Why are they here? And so being there several times and really kind of going the extra mile. At this point, you know, we have people on staff a lot of times that get called at 2 and 3 in the morning, which I'm not advocating for, but, you know, there's an outage in the middle of the winter and everything's not working, and they have, you know, maybe a half hour left of charge on their battery, and then everything's going to go cold. And it's like, what are you going to do? And so the fact that people have been working closely over many years and have built the trust has really been an important piece of that. So what we now try to do is kind of bring in more people. And, you know, I just saw, for example, on our chat here, you know, Kyle Bolger is somebody who's in Kotzebue right now working in the region. He's heading with some of our other staff to Deering tomorrow. And same thing, and we're now bringing in Launch Alaska for another project, and it's with support from entities like the Northwest Arctic and the Northwest Arctic Borough and the individual communities there. So everything has to be kind of with approval of the community. And in the end, and I've been saying this more and more lately, that there's all this great work going on, but if we don't actually bring real benefits, which means things like jobs and skills and workforce training and lower energy costs and improved energy security to the communities, we're not doing our jobs. There's a lot of money floating around, and all the people outside the communities are making money. Every time you go in, you're viewed, okay, you're getting paid here for every minute you're here, and we're asking for volunteers and people in the community to do stuff. And so, and they often don't get paid. And so, we're trying as best we can to, whether it's provide honorariums or, real skill training and all of those sorts of things. That's really what I see as incumbent upon the outsiders coming in, quote unquote, trying to make this a better situation. Is we have to bring those benefits to the people in the communities. And if it's, we can check a box and say, oh, it's great, we're reducing diesel fuel. But if nobody's prices go down and there's no jobs created, and they still need other people from the outside to fly in and fix stuff, we haven't really changed things so much. So that's really just the overall orientation. That's not the nuts and bolts, but that's kind of the first layer of the onion, if you will.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's super important, overarching strategy and way of working with people that I think is really important to highlight. I'm also curious, I think one of you mentioned in your intro, working with the utility, how important that is to establish that really good working relationship, and also to really understand and talk about, the impacts and potential benefits that an independent power producer can have for a utility. So I'd love to hear from any panelist who, wants to speak to that process of, like, that every community has a different utility. It might be AVEC, but it also might be an independent utility. So how do you navigate that process and talk about some of the impacts and benefits that an IPP can have up for a utility?
I'll take a quick stab at that. So, I mean, here in the interior, we're Tanana Chiefs Conference, like, there are 42 tribal communities, 37 of which are federally recognized tribes, but over 90% of our communities are in remote isolated microgrids. 8 of them are AVEC villages. There are 7 that are AP&T communities. There's TDX, another utility, MT&T, 13 independent utilities. So we really have a mosaic of utilities at hand. And so it's all a case by case basis kind of, and really the relationships are very important. But one of my prime goals and jobs really is just working with the utilities, because to boil down, what my job really is to achieve is to keep the lights on. So working with utilities to achieve that, whether it's through existing upgrades or, resolving outages or any problems that are existing, or grant writing to implement and install new renewable energy systems, but then making them in a way that they'll be sustainable through the creation of independent power producers. It's all really, just by having conversations, face to face is always, there's so much there is so much value in that. Like, for instance, tomorrow I'm heading to Fort Yukon to go talk to which is the corporation, the utility owner there, to discuss the project that we have been awarded through BIA. And we really just value that firstly, and having continued discussion throughout the whole process, through the engineering design of it. There's a lot of lessons that have been learned, and you cannot leave out the utility or community, or really you have to involve a lot of entities that are in each community. So that's a little that's kind of my take there. So I don't know if Ingemar or Brian has any follow-up.
Yeah, I can speak to that. But 2008, when we started to come together because of the energy crisis and electricity and fuel went through the roof, we brought the whole leadership in from the whole region. And that included all the utilities also, all the fuel producers, all of us were sitting down and making this discussion. And for us, holding that particular discussion twice a year through 16 years now has been the biggest changing factor, I believe, to slowly everybody is like helping each other. From that beginning, everybody had a kind of a standoff where everybody had their own turfs. There was the fuel turfs, there was the utility turfs, and then there was the communities and then the borough. And luckily, we had this borough envelope that we've been holding together the region, and then being able to keep this energy plan meetings going twice a year through 16 years, keeping everybody in the loop and keep bringing up question after question after question and resolving them as we went along. Slowly, comes out of that a consistent future look for everybody to look into. And out of that came eventually doing the IPPs and let us have independent power producers in the region, hand in hand with utilities that then would together ultimately help the community. Everybody is in the same boat, right? So it's the utility, it's the city, it's the tribe, it's the borough, and it's the in the case of our corporations up there, everybody's in the same boat. And holding all that together, keep the discussion open, let everybody in, and come to a conclusion that we'll all help each other. And now we're helping each other write the grants that makes it all happen.
Yeah,
just real quickly, I'm totally reinforcing what Ingemar said. This Energy Steering Committee has been a huge vehicle. And I know Eddie's shaking his head because he just went to the last one. And I think pretty much every time somebody from outside the Northwest Arctic region goes up there, they're like, oh, now I get it. And it really is kind of a remarkable vehicle and process. And it's almost like, you kind of go into this meeting. It's 2 days of just like really detailed technical discussion and very diverse constituency and bringing everybody together. And there's, all the curtains are pulled back. And so it's a really valuable process. And then another thing that Eddie had just mentioned also that I wanted to just reinforce is that when we first started doing these projects, and be it just the technical side as well as the power purchase agreements, it was very tedious and everything was new and we made a bunch of mistakes and we had to go back and fix things and all of that stuff. At this stage, in terms of like putting in a solar battery project, for example, if it weren't for all of the paperwork, we can do that in a year. We've gotten to the point where, we can even do multiple ones in a year, give or take workforce issues, right? At this stage, there are not a lot of mysteries there. And whatever are sort of remaining questions, we have pretty well defined, thermal management in the battery building. What's the best approach? What's the best appliance to provide that heating? Those are still some questions that are maybe out there in a way, but 95+% of all of the variables and little details we have dialed in already, on spreadsheets and bills of materials and, RFPs and all of that stuff. So we're ready to go. There are other challenges around, supply chains and workforce and paperwork that needs to be in place beforehand. But it's been a process, but, if we had our way, we could do a lot of these projects pretty quickly at this point. And I'm not saying we're going to, because there are challenges, but we've learned a lot over the years.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I mean, I know with the funding awards that have been announced this year so far, like it is a real big acceleration moment. And so I think, having that built up expertise is huge. And I also think the regional steering committee that both of you have mentioned does really seem to have been a great model for really, comprehensive and collaborative energy decision making. And I'm curious, Ingemar, if there's anything you wanted to add about how the steering committee helps streamline the IPP process and management. I know that, by sort of supporting multiple, you're able to reach, you've talked about some economies of scale.
Yeah, so one thing that the borough does is provide the umbrella to be able to help put together the grants with our supporters. We have a consultant, DeerStone, with us, and Nana on the other side. We all work together towards getting the structure in place to put in a grant. But in the end, the community by itself, some of them very small, don't have admin capacity. So what we're doing is having an overarching admin umbrella for the IPPs, where we help them do the invoicing back and forth to the utility. We make sure that the project is insured and that there is money sitting in a fund that can be dispatched back and forth as needed. And that fund is then invested actually in the stock market if there's extra. So they have an energy fund that then can grow if there's enough money and they're not using it. Additional to that, under our USDA grant, we actually have something called REPOP, which is an optimization program where we have now a center person that is the IPP coordinator, that is a position at the borough, and that's the go-to person that they can call, and that person can then dispatch or connect directly to the other utilities, AVAC or outside entities or all of us. So we're creating this network of support to make sure that for the next 25 years or so, we can hold this together and provide the support service admin that is needed to keep the IPPs running. And then side by side with AVAC, of course, and our other 3 utilities in Buckland, Deering, and Kotzebue. So that's kind of the bigger structure. The IPPs will slowly convert, I think, our steering committee into something where the IPP becomes eventually maybe some kind of board where they hold together the energy plan going into the future. The energy plan was created in 2008 and 2009 initially by Nana, and then since then we've been updating it, and the latest version I believe is 2022, and we keep adding things in there and how the community changes and the region changes, so that document is a dynamic living document that then kind of is governed by the group and will continue that continuous support. So I know that other regions don't have a borough, and you have to create another kind of umbrella to be able to do it. And that would be what my take on this is, that the small communities need support in a bigger way.
Yeah, thank you. And it was cool to hear about the the evolution you guys see in that model into the future, as now you've got more and more IPPs coming online and changing to like the next phase. That's cool to hear. I'd also love to hear from Eddie. I mean, I know that PCC, you guys serve a much many more communities than the Northwest Arctic Borough. So I'm curious how you guys are like scaling up or changing the regional model that Ingemar described to fit your communities and region.
Yeah, we started off, with the vision of, yes, let's make these sustainable. Let's create independent power producers as a model to have the revenue generated to support the operation, maintenance, and other investments that are needed to really warranty additionally these systems. So with Hughes, it's independent, they have their own independent power producer. Same with Galena, and we fully respect the sovereignty of each tribe and community and their desires. However, in a similar model to Northwest Arctic Borough being an umbrella, Tanana Chiefs Conference, it is our goal to be like a unified voice to help advance tribal self-determination. And with that, we really see a regional IPP providing a lot of value, essentially, that of all the future solar projects we'll be installing, since Tanana Chiefs Conference has been the awardee for now 12 plus solar battery arrays throughout the region, that we would be the independent power producer working with utilities in each of these communities, selling the power generated from the solar array to the utility at an agreed upon rate, and we would be collecting revenue amongst all of these future projects, and then divvying up that revenue to numerous things, contracts with the tribe, lease agreements, our staff travel and direct, and putting it like into like a 3% or however much reserve for the equipment. And then finally, but most importantly, is reinvesting it back into the community. And that's really where we, similar to Ingemar, having a board, having a steering committee is ultimately where we want to do is, TC would be really the administrative, navigating the waters of these, with these utilities, managing these contracts, and then working and creating a system to have operators that are maintaining these systems, and then really pulling together funds in a wise way to reinvest in the communities in a plethora of ways. And we're really still devising how to do so and having conversations with people like the RCA and others on how to reinvest in communities, because there's many options there.
Yeah, thank you. I think that it's really inspiring to hear how it's changing to the needs of different communities and different utilities and different regions. I also another big role in the process of setting up and maintaining an IPP is, of course, that admin, that bookkeeping that Ingemar has mentioned, repop doing. That's obviously crucial for a utility, no matter if they have an IPP or not. And we have some, like I mentioned, experienced folks in the room over at the training. Especially, I know Connie has worked with some of these, Connie Fredenberg has worked with some of these efforts pretty extensively. I don't know if you're if you're close to a mic or able to speak, but if you are, it would be great to hear a bit more about how having an IPP and a PPA, interacts with some of the PCE reporting, and also like how you help navigate that process. Connie, I don't know if you're.
Yeah, there's a microphone right there. No, it's right there. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, one of the problems with all this grant-funded equipment, all the renewable energy projects, was that, you can't depreciate it. The RCA doesn't allow you to depreciate grant-funded equipment. So there was really, without adding higher costs to ratepayers, there was no way to save to repair and replace equipment that was grant funded. And so that was kind of the initial thing, how to do that. And also the loss of not using as much fuel was causing PCE rates to go down. So it was, folks were like, wait a minute, here we put in all this expensive equipment and yet our rates haven't changed. And so creating an IPP that turned the renewable kilowatt hours into a fuel cost was a way to recover PCE. And the other thing, though, that's a problem with this renewable stuff is that if you're making excess kilowatt hours and want to sell them as heat, the RCA will include those kilowatt hours when they calculate your PCE rate, which causes it to be lower. And they'll subtract the revenue from that from your non-fuel costs, which also reduces your PCE rate. So I saw Steve Colt asked a question about how does PCE need to change. I don't think that's a change in statute or regulate. It's just a change in policy, how they manage things, because they don't do that with every utility. They don't. Can I talk about this? Okay. I don't want to get INN in trouble, but they did it right. Brent Petrie, I think it was, that went before the commissioners and convinced them that with his hydropower, all they had to do was open a valve to make more water, more electricity, which was then available to be diverted to a heat to boilers and create heat, displacing a lot of diesel that would be used to create that heat otherwise. And he convinced them so that now the way they work theirs is they don't have to count those. They count those kilowatt hours when calculating line loss, so they don't have high line loss, but they exclude them when they calculate their PCE rate. Well, I tried to do that with the utility of Kongiganek, and they said, no, you can't do that. That INN is special, because all they had to do is open that valve. And I said, wait a minute, Kong has to curtail their wind turbines in order not to make the excess kilowatt hours that can be diverted to heat. So to me, that's an even stronger case. But I guess we have to take that to the commissioners. I couldn't use precedent if that didn't work. So we still have to deal with that issue. And I don't think they should subtract the income either. Like if you have income revenue from selling heat kilowatt hours, it shouldn't be taken away from your non-fuel costs.
Kind of a quick question from the chat is who are they, like when you're in that story that you're referring to?
Oh, the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. Sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying. And yeah, I think there's a lot of, technical terms like line loss and things that are a little hard to explain to a big audience, but I would say that there are some great resources like on AEA's website that sort of explain those terms if anyone is curious. It'd be a lot to go into. It'd be a whole PCE webinar if we were to try to explain all of those things, but that's sort of what you guys are doing over there at the training, is explaining how all those things interact. And I think it's great to hear, from someone who's looking really closely at the details of these different programs and how they all interact as this model evolves. Thank you, Connie. Brian. Mm-hmm.
If I could just briefly, because people are looking maybe at the chat and questions. There's a question there about how much revenue loss to IPPs can utilities sustain before they go insolvent. And I think the whole point here, and maybe it wasn't clearly communicated, is that the way we're structuring the IPPs is that the utilities are made whole. So instead of losing revenue by purchasing power from an IPP, they are able to maintain their allocation or supplement from the state of Alaska for power cost equalization. The way the formula works for PCE is that a utility can buy diesel fuel or they can buy something else for generating the same kilowatt hours. And if instead of buying diesel fuel, they're buying clean, renewable energy from an outside entity, then the utility receives all the same revenue that they otherwise would. So theoretically, I mean, this is unrealistic, but theoretically, there could be an IPP that generates all of the power for the community, and the utility would then be essentially a distribution utility where they're just distributing and selling power, and they would still receive their PCE. That's highly unlikely for all sorts of technical and other reasons, but the point simply being, to answer that question, the utilities are not losing revenue with the institution of IPPs, the way we're structuring it in rural Alaska, in part because of the power cost equalization arrangement.
Yeah, thank you, Ingemar. I see you have your hand raised. I think it'd be great to hear your perspective, and also to get to ground us in what percentage of energy some of your IPPs are providing for the communities they're in. Because I think Brian was mentioning, theoretically it could provide all of it, but you guys are, that might not be the roadmap.
Yeah, it's not likely.
About there was a time deep in COVID territory in 2019, 2020, as we were building the Shungnak project, that I called Connie up and said, what happens if we give the project to the tribe and the utility buys the power from the tribe? What happens to the PCE? And she goes, it'll be preserved. And then we went from there. And that's what happened when we made the discussion of the initial thing for the Shungnak project to become an IPP in 2021. So a lot of credit to Connie. Had long discussions with her on the PCE, and she's definitely the expert in the room down there.
There's more than one.
Yep. So the other question was there on.
Yeah, about what percentage of
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So I just made a little study of where we're going, and in the communities out there, KEA is doing 20 to 30% renewable electricity for Kotzebue. In Buckland and Deering and Shungnak and now Noatak, we are at about 10-11% of the electricity. We just are in the process of negotiating a big grant from Department of Energy, OSED, and that will encompassing all 11 communities to maximum build out of solar. When we get there, it predicts that 25% of all electricity in the region will be solar or wind powered at that point. Beyond that, for solar, it aims to basically maximize the amount of solar we can get. Beyond that, we'd have to look for wind sites or possible hydro site. But it's getting there. I think we are understanding more and more of how much solar can we get at a given latitude. And at our latitude, it's about 11% capacity. It's a little more lower Alaska, of course, and the closer you get to the equator, you get to the 50%. But we've all learned a lot of how to do solar arrays, and I think we are on the path of having at least 25% electricity for all of Alaska eventually.
Thank you for that context. And you guys, I think we've kind of circled around talking about, revenues to the IPP, addressed that, it's not necessarily diminishing, what the utility is getting under the current model. But I think it would be helpful too to hear from Ingemar and Eddie about where you guys are in your process of deciding, how to use those IPP revenues in your region for the communities with IPPs and maybe without IPPs. I don't know where you are, so I'd love to hear from maybe Eddie first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the ideal scenario and the biggest, or the chief complaint we hear from residents in our communities is that their electric bills are just outrageous, and that is one of the concepts that we really wanted to address, is how can we actually positively affect what the ratepayers paying. So in an ideal scenario, in a way without gaming the PC system, it would be ideal to put it on their bills. I mean, obviously there's controversy there, but if that could be done, that would be perfect. If there's ways to do it in an alternative manner, that would be perfect as well. But we're still really devising that. But like an investment fund for like emergency heat, or investing in heat pumps. There's a plethora of alternative ways, but really we're trying to see how we can work an angle to make change to the residents. But we want to make an IPP, the whole point of its revenue is to positively affect the community. We're not just generating revenue to take it out of the community. We want to keep it in the community. So that's our goal, is to find an angle and keep the PCE clean, make sure the utility is doing fine, and at the end of the day, most importantly, community members are seeing benefit too.
Okay, I guess I can address it next if you want. So yeah, the main cause of all this, of course, is number one, displacing as much diesel fuel as we can out of the region, and then whatever we can do more to lower the cost of the household's energy, the better. So there is suggestions, and one of the big suggestions in our communities is that the fuel cost is extremely high. In some cases, like Ambler, it's up to $18 a gallon. And one thing that could be used for the communities would be to have an energy subsidy, where they pay out to the households per gallon or whatever they are needing to do that. That will be up to each council. As we're doing these directly with the councils, they can make the decision and choose to, at some point or another, use the excess funds Primarily, though, the funds are there to create the extra job service and caretaking of the solar array, and then insurance and everything else is paid. And when there's leftovers beyond that, would be then to try to lower the cost for the households. That's the best way I think we're doing it. Under the OSED grant, we also are going to implement heat pumps in all the communities, which would additionally lower the cost, hopefully by using electricity from the renewable systems that we're putting in during those 6 months and beyond. They can offset even more diesel fuel. The combination of the solar arrays we're building out plus the heat pumps seem to be, by 2028 will be offsetting 500,000 gallons a year that we don't need. So that's the bigger scenario. And I should mention that, you know, the household cost in rural Alaska mostly balances around 23-24 cents per kilowatt hours against the rail grid. And that's how the PCE formula functions. If the rail grid is at 24 cents, we are at 24 cents. And unfortunately, there is an issue with the rail grid, maybe going to be more expensive. Natural gas is running out, electricity may go up. If electricity goes up at the rail grid to 30, we'll be at 30 in the rural communities too.
Thank you for that context. Yeah, I think that's really important, that the equalization, you know, goes both ways. So I think it would be a great time to address some of these chat or Q&A questions. Donovan, do you have any that you spotted that we should tackle first?
Well, I think you guys have been doing a great job of addressing them as they came in. I think this is sort of an extension of the PCE question that you guys already answered, so I'm not sure if there's much more to add, but I'll just address Mark Lisak's question, saying, are there obstacles that you've identified legislative or in the formula that could be removed or amended to protect the PCE supplement to encourage utilities to pursue incorporating renewables? So like I said, sort of an extension of a question that was already addressed. And then just a reminder to folks to lock those in the Q&A so they're easier to pick out, but I'll try and scroll through the chat, or if you all see some that you want to address, please feel free to hop in.
I saw Dave Reese mention, is there systemic training programs available to develop local O&M workforce to construct the systems? So, I mean, I envision, these are two different workforces, one for operation and maintenance, one for construction. But certainly there's a growing number of contractors throughout the state. And I saw Edwin Byfeld was on the chat, and he's a great example of, you know, employing local workforce, you know, with native hiring preference to construct these solar arrays and battery systems. But in terms of local O&M, which I think is important, and we factor that into all the budgeting when, for the revenue, and that's how we set aside money for in our IPPs. So local O&M training, that is all a little bit, working with the contractors who are installing the systems, but secondly, yeah, just like we need to create that training, certainly. And I'm definitely trying to, like, our goal is to increase our capacity and have someone in-house that is in charge of utilizing the, you know, local labor, local hire for operation and maintenance, and training them here in a central location or on site. So that is something to be devised, but really ultimately is very important is how are we going to operate and maintain these systems, not just on a financial aspect, but on an actual practical standpoint. I think is very important to consider for ensuring that these 25-year systems or 25-year systems, you know, are they have the workforce that will be responsibly taking care of it.
Yeah, and I'm curious, I know, Ingemar, you mentioned repop at Northwest Arctic Borough, and I know, you know, that's you guys are working on, you know, training people who live in the Northwest Arctic Borough alongside DeerStone Consulting and other partners to, you know, maintain these systems. Is there anything you wanted to add to that discussion?
Yeah, we're training people as we go with each community and bring them in and try to identify people that are willing to take care of the system afterwards. Many times it can be even the utility operator that just ends up with some extra work, but there need to be at least 2 of them in the community so there's a backup if something goes wrong. And we continue that training process as we go project by project now with our big grants. So we're planning to have some training in the summer, and also that has to do with our heat pump project, where we're building basically a whole new device. Initially, people got Toyo stoves out in the community, and they started to take care of them, and we have to do a similar thing, training people on heat pumps and issues with heat pumps, so that becomes a new little service niche for people to function with. So yeah, the training is the big piece of it, and under our REPOP program, we'll keep working on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I know I've gotten to speak to Shantae, who I know is at REPOP, and it seems like she's doing a great job, along with Leah at DeerStone, I believe, and some other folks who are really making sure those systems are always at maximum strength. Were there any new Q&A questions? Because if not, I can ask a final question, Donovan.
I mean, sort of a reiteration of the PCE question, which I know is a very valid one, but sort of tangential to the IPP focus for this afternoon's webinar. So I guess maybe I'll just use this as a way to make the plug I would at the end, where these panels are going to be at the Sustainable Energy Conference next week too. So really, hopefully this is a good way for you to all familiarize yourself with them and their work, and then sort of work up the courage to engage with them in person, hopefully next week. But I'll give it back to you, Jenny, maybe with a sort of final wrap-up question.
Yeah, sure. So I think we've all heard about, or it has been mentioned during this webinar, tens of millions of dollars are going to some of these IPP models or IPP initiatives that you all are working on. Incredibly exciting, maybe a little daunting. So I guess, final question being, what other roles or resources or innovations do you see a need for in order to, accelerate and sustain these models for, like you were saying, the next, 20 years, or even, just the next 5 years, as we have this big batch of projects coming our way? To any panelist who wants to kick it off. I know it's a big question.
Hard one to answer, but we do need the process streamlined. There's going to be more tariffs onto Chinese goods. So the American process of buying America or not is kind of a daunting one that we're up against here for a while. But we all have to try to share the resources that's available, and there might be some bottlenecks in the next few years with all the money that's going out there on projects and available contractors to make them. There might be some slowing down there. That may be one of the big things through from what the Biden administration want to do with the money. How quick can we get it to functional projects and operational, and streamline that process is probably one of the big things.
I would actually add to that, because I totally agree, is two of the things we've talked about here today, the workforce training development and this regional support organization. Those things have been often like add-ons after the fact, or at least things we've known we've needed to do, but there hasn't always been reliable or obvious funding streams to do them. And so right now I'd say we're doing kind of workarounds, or we know those are real issues and needs, but they're on the margins of what we're doing. And fortunately now we have enough funding where we can really sort of say, okay, if you get training in this, you can be putting up solar panels for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? We know there's enough projects to do that right now, but it's still not an explicit, there are training programs out there, there's funding out there, what have you, but at least in my mind, and maybe it's my deficiency at this point, but it feels like there's not as much straightforward approaches for getting people trained, and then these kind of regional support organizations were really getting super creative around financing and pulling some money out of the IPP and doing this and doing that. But for example, there aren't, to my knowledge, like a funding application that says, okay, we realize you need, $1 a support organization to keep all this stuff going. It's the O&M, right? Everybody always talks about it. There's money for capital up front. There's not money for ongoing O&M. And so we often just, work things until they fail, and then you go after capital money again. And so that's not going to last forever, and it's not the best approach. So hopefully we can come up with a streamlined and focused process for dealing with workforce and O&M.
Great. Thank you guys. I think that's something we hear from a lot of different renewable projects. And so it's great to have your perspective on it as well. I think I will turn it over to Donovan for our last minute wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I mean, wow, what an incredible panel. Also, what an incredible group. Thank you for all your engagement in the chat. A lot of really helpful resources. And that's the big motivation behind this webinar series, is to obviously create a space where energy professionals and experts across the state can share their expertise and perspective, but then also you all can start to engage with them and make connections and really benefit from that while sharing your own. So as always, I'll make a plug. If you're interested in perhaps sharing your expertise on a future webinar, we host a fall series as well. So please keep in touch and reach out. I'll just reiterate that these panelists will be sharing their expertise at the Sustainable Energy Conference next week. So please, take a look at that if you're planning on attending. Don't be a stranger. Walk up to them or to us to continue to engage and to speak and to share. But just really appreciate the panelists as well for taking the time today. There's a lot of prep that went in beforehand, and obviously a lot of prior work that went into their succinct explanation of what we're seeing statewide here in terms of independent power producers and the benefits that they bring to Alaskan ratepayers. So again, just want to thank everyone here. Really appreciative for everyone's support today. I'll let you go on the hour here, but stay tuned. We'll make the recording available, and please continue to engage and reach out with any questions or resources that you feel fit. But thanks again to everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, thank you all, especially to our group of PCE trainees and trainers over at KCA. Take care.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.